Board 744-136.
Mr. DeBorg, let me explain our process to you. First, I'm going to read some information into the record, and then we're going to conduct a parole interview with you. At the appropriate time, we will allow those persons who wish to speak to have their input. Currently here today, speaking in opposition is Dr. Robert Melton and Vicki Johnston. At the end of that hearing, you'll have an opportunity to make a statement to the board, and then we'll vote. Do you understand our process?
Yes, sir.
I can't hear you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. DeBorg, this is Jeremy DeBorg, 744-136. Date of birth is June the 8th of 1978. He's a second-class offender. He has a parole eligibility date of July 28th of 2022, an adjusted good time date of March the 15th of 2026, a full term date of January the 29th of 2027. He is currently serving a 6-year sentence on the charge of domestic abuse battery or battery upon a dating partner after having been adjudicated a habitual offender. His date of sentencing is March the 10th of 2022. Mr. Laborde, is all of those things accurate?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Laborde, your case has been assigned to me to begin our interview process, so I'll start our process. Mr. DeBorg, how old are you, sir?
45 years old.
And how long have you been in prison on these particular charges?
2.5 years.
Tell me a little bit about your educational background. How far did you go to school?
I got a GED from college and went through Navy training.
Where did you get your GED and when did you get your GED?
My GED I received shortly after dropping out of high school. So I would say age of 18.
All right. And some college. Where'd you go to college?
Delgado.
Okay. And you said you were in the Navy?
Yes, sir.
How long were you in the Navy?
4 years.
And were you honorably discharged?
No, sir.
What was your discharge? How did you get out of the Navy?
Other than honorable, sir.
What happened and why?
I was in possession of drug paraphernalia.
Well, let's talk a little bit about drugs. Is drugs, alcohol an issue with you?
No, sir.
You've had two DWIs. You don't think alcohol is an issue?
That was roughly 20 years ago, sir. That's no longer a part of my life.
Well, when did you start drinking?
In my late teens.
And how much were you drinking when you had your DWIs? How often were you drinking when you had your DWIs?
Usually on the weekends, 2-3 days on the weekends.
When did you quit drinking?
Well, upon my incarceration, I would have a drink on occasion, but it wasn't anything that was habitual or a regular part of my life.
How about drugs?
No, sir. Well,
you kicked out of the Navy because of drug paraphernalia. Let's talk about that.
Yes,
You never had a drug problem? You never did drugs before?
it was something that was in my property. When I moved all my property out of storage to my permanent duty station in Florida, it was there, and I got caught with it. It wasn't part of my service.
Your evaluation that the Department of Corrections did for you indicates that you're a low risk to offend, but it also says that you have very high substance abuse needs. Why do you think that is if alcohol and drugs aren't an issue with you?
Say again, I have very high,
needs for substance abuse treatment. Tell me why that might be, or what you might have said, or what might have happened to have them make that decision.
I'm not sure.
I'm sorry?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this particular offense that occurred on January the 18th of 2021. Tell me what happened.
Her and I had been arguing for a while.
Let's talk about her. Who is her?
Vicky Johnston.
Okay, and what was your relationship with her at the time?
I was her boyfriend.
Y'all were currently in a relationship, or had y'all broken up?
We had broken up, gotten back together, broken up, gotten back together. It was an ongoing cycle.
Was she the victim in your first domestic abuse battery charge?
No, sir.
That was a different victim. We'll get to that later, but that was a different victim.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about what happened in this particular case.
At the time, I was dealing with a terminally ill mother. And her and I had had a falling out. And
Her meaning your mother or your girlfriend?
my mother.
Okay.
Vicky told me that she couldn't be with somebody who didn't have a good relationship with their mother. We argued about that, and it eventually came to a point to where I had agreed to go and try and reconcile with my mother. That ended the Saturday night. Sunday morning, I woke up and received a call that I had lost my job. We decided to spend the day together. We went to watch a football game, and in the process of the football game, she left. At that point, I tried to force her to talk to me. I tried to exert control over the situation.
Tell me how you tried to force her to talk to you.
Incessantly texting her, calling her, threatening to get her a noise complaint evicted from her apartment.
Let me stop you just for a second. Let's talk a little bit now about the previous domestic abuse battery charge you had. Did you go to prison for that charge?
No, sir.
I'm sorry?
No, sir.
You were put on probation?
Correct, sir. That completed early, and
I'm sorry?
I said, yes, sir, and I completed that early.
Well, I hear you, but I want to talk to you a little bit about that. I assume that the judge in that case required you to go to some sort of domestic violence program or take some sort of treatment for the battery charge. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
What did you learn in that program about domestic abuse battery and controlling activities and that sort of thing? What did you learn in that program?
It's often a cycle of abuse. One thing leads to another.
So why were we continuing to do this with the victim in this case?
I really don't have a good explanation of that other than extenuating circumstances.
Oh. So go ahead. What happened after that? I mean, I've got the police report. I've seen the answers. I've seen you've been convicted of this. You've been adjudicated as a habitual offender. Today is the day for you to come clean. The victim is here. She's going to tell us what happened. So come clean with me.
I went to her apartment and, repeatedly banged on her door, texted her, called her. She showed up, and when we went in the house and when we started talking, the police showed up and escorted me out. Then I came back, and that's when I put my hands on her throat. When I released her, She went and she threw my clothes out the window.
When you say you put your hands on her throat, you were choking, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
You were trying to strangle. So, I mean, let's be honest here today about what you did.
Okay.
And why was that? Why were you doing it?
I was angry.
And you were angry at her because
I was being rejected.
you were what?
I was being rejected.
And so then what happened?
And she threw my clothes out the window. I grabbed her laptop and threatened to throw her laptop out the window if she didn't go and get my clothes. So she left. She went to go get my clothes. I followed her out. We exchanged clothes for laptop. I went back to the apartment. She did not. I ended up falling asleep, and when I woke up, the police were there, and I was arrested.
So tell me, this is the second time this happened. So tell me what happened in the first domestic abuse battery case. What was that about? What were the facts of that case?
She attacked me, and in defense of myself, I put her in a stranglehold and got away from the situation. I accepted full responsibility for that by letter of law. I thought I was protecting myself and avoiding the situation. But by the letter of the law, it was strangulation. So I took the offense and took the probation.
And then you come back and do the same thing again a few years later, after having been ordered to do a domestic violence program and to understand what's going on with you. What programs have you taken while you've been in prison?
I've taken pre-release, anger management. I'm in the process of taking victim impact, job life skills, IC3 computer literacy, NCCER core curriculum, and I'm EETC certified for small engine electrical.
So what have you learned? Here I am on the board, and it's my responsibility to make a determination as to whether or not I should release you or not, or vote to release you or not. You have been convicted twice of domestic violence by strangulation. So why should I run the risk of letting you out in something like this happening again?
Because I've learned that it's not okay to try and impose your will on somebody. Everyone has a right to feel how they feel.
Why didn't you learn that the last time you took the domestic violence program?
I don't have a good answer for that.
Well, what concerns me is I was hoping maybe to say, oh, well, he's a drug addict or he's an alcoholic. These are the problems that I have. You say, no, that's not an issue with you, although DOC says you have a serious substance abuse issue. You say, no, that's not. So I guess it's just you're a mean and angry person. I'm trying to, what have you figured out since you've been in prison thinking about these things and these programs that you've taken? What is it that's caused you to do this?
My background has led me to have serious abandonment issues, has caused me to question my self-worth, given me insecurities. And I believe those have caused me to lash out. Now that I'm speaking about it, that might be where the substance abuse diagnosis is coming from, based off of those insecurities and inferiority complex, maybe. Both of my parents left when I was very, very young, and I had to be raised by a surrogate parent.
Tell me about the write-up you had for fighting in April of 2022.
Yes, sir. I was in the TV room and me and a fellow were watching Deadliest Catch. And with my experience in the Navy, I was trying to explain something about the rough seas, and he escalated it into an argument. At some point, he threatened me, so I stood and backed away. When I did that, he came at me, so I wrestled him to the ground until I could get away. I left, I went to my rack. He then came at me with a combination lock tucked away in his sock. I was able to avoid that and wrestle him to the ground again. The incident, the incident report states that never once did I hit him or attempt to retaliate against him. I simply subdued the threat and backed away. I never hurt him. I never inflicted pain upon him. I was in control, and I did what I could to protect myself. When I could escape, I did.
Tell me, you were enrolled in victim impact, victim awareness. Did you finish that program?
No, sir. I got about 3 weeks left.
Tell me what you learned in that program. What do you believe your actions have had upon the victim in this case?
Long-lasting effect. This is something that she's probably going to carry with her for the rest of her life. She made a statement after my sentencing, and one part of it really affected me and still stays with me to this day. She told me that she went out on a date with a guy and tried to see somebody else and couldn't. And that made me feel really, really terrible. She's a good person, and she deserves to have that in her life. And if I took that from her, I can never give that back. And I'm sorry.
What have you learned from your anger management classes?
That it's okay to feel an emotion. It doesn't require an action. You can feel it, acknowledge it, and let it pass. That's one of the biggest things that I've learned.
How will you be able to control your anger in the future?
I think for me, at least, is to identify where it comes from, and that separation issue and the abandonment issues and the insecurities. To understand that it comes from that gives me a better way of dealing with it when it does arise, and allows me to step back and be like, you know what, maybe it is me and it's not them that I feel angry.
What can you tell us, Warden, if anything, about Mr. DeMora?
Well, Mr. Maribel, obviously, I would like to see him complete the impact class that he's in right now and the job life class. But also, we have our Thinking for a Change class. I think that he needs that to help him learn, deal with his anger issues a little more, because they've obviously been an issue all his life and still, and I think he's trying to figure out ways to understand it. But and also, I mean, you in my records, I show that he does not have a history of substance abuse. I didn't know about the 2 DWIs, but so obviously I would have recommended substance abuse training as well, because that's probably got a lot to do with things. So
Thank you, Warden. I appreciate your comments. Any questions? No. Now let's hear from Miss Vicki Johnston.
Hello, am I unmuted?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. Thank you. If you'll introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like us to know, please.
Hello, I'm Vicki Johnston, the most recent victim of Jeremy Dubourg. And I just pray that you will deny him and help keep the women in Louisiana a little bit safer for a few more years. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jones. Dr. Robert Melton.
Hi, my name is Robert Melton. I am the oldest son of Vicki Johnston. And she just asked that I speak on her behalf because I've been very involved in this whole thing since it began. I know I've written my statement. You guys have reviewed it. I am in opposition of Mr. Dubourg's release. He stated, the lasting impact that he fears my mom will experience, and she has been experiencing. Shortly after everything, with the state of Louisiana's help, I moved her out to New Mexico, where she lived with me for a period of about 1.5 years or so. And then I've recently moved again, and I brought her along with me. Throughout the entire time, we have put in significant measures to make sure that she remains safe. We limit her information online. We have purchased security systems, which I monitor frequently. We are in the process of changing her phone number because she still has residual fear and effects of what I would say are very similar to PTSD. So when Mr. Dubourg mentioned the very repetitive phone calls, text messages threatening her, those effects still linger. When she gets a call from an unknown number or a spam, it's an immediate sense of fear. Is that him trying to contact her? So this is something that I think she will have to live with forever. We're in the process of moving her again. We'll have a PO box set up. We don't give her address out to people. She rarely posts on social media, which is a big change from her past. So we're doing everything we can to try to give her a sense of security, but I think unfortunately that has been impaired and will remain impaired for a very long time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Myers.
Good afternoon, Ernie Meyer, Assistant DA in Jefferson Parish, and we have a strong opposition to Mr. Dubourg's release on parole. My impression of his comments to the panel, based on y'all's questions, is that he wasn't being completely honest with you. He was limiting what he was willing to tell you to, I guess, make it sound a little bit better for him. He's got a history of domestic abuse and very little programming. As the warden said, he needs additional programming. He's thinking for a change. He needs some more help to get him over this. Only programs I've seen in the record was pre-release and one anger management course. He does have a low risk assessment, but substance abuse is high, as well as mental health is moderate, and that's concerning to me. There's a Department of Corrections letter in the record that talks about his programmings and the things he's done. Vocational programs and self-improvement programs, they have not applicable. And I didn't see that he's taken much with regard to that. Very strong victim opposition. We think he should be denied at this point. Oh, and I will say on his prior, when you were asking him about his prior domestic abuse conviction, I was looking some things up in the record, and it's somewhat limited, so I wasn't able to get all the information I was looking for. But there was a rule to revoke that was filed, but eventually dismissed. And it was filed because he failed to complete and even enroll in a domestic violence program. I'm assuming that was eventually completed because the rule was dismissed. It was for that as well as for probation fees. Probation fees were in fact paid, and I assume that he did complete the domestic violence program. So for all those reasons, we're opposed to his request.
Thank you very much, Mr. Myers. Appreciate your comments. Mr. DeBorg, is there anything you'd like to say to the board before the board votes?
I do have a statement that I prepared that I'd like to read, but I'd also like to comment on Mr. Myers saying that there was a rule to revoke based on not completing the domestic violence program. That happened all during the COVID quarantine. So it eventually, the reason it took so long was to find a program that was willing to do it via Zoom.
I think he was talking about the first charge, which would have been before that was before COVID.
No,
This
sir.
charge was after, this charge was before COVID.
It was after.
So well, I thought your first domestic violence program where you were given probation occurred in 2019. And if that's the case, COVID wasn't until the next year.
Right. Vicky and I were dating while I was going through the program.
All right. Okay, go ahead, continue your statement.
Roger that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're here today to determine if I should be granted parole. Today is extremely important to me, so I've prepared this letter to reflect that. I've worked very hard to get here, and I want to make the most out of this opportunity. Since the beginning of my incarceration, I have dedicated myself to becoming a better person. In pursuit of that goal, I started studying psychology and philosophy. Through the independent studies, I have learned a great many things as well as developed a deeper understanding of myself. One of the most important lessons I've learned is not every emotion requires a reaction. You can feel the emotion, acknowledge it, and then let it pass without ever taking any action. I've learned this is not only healthy, but oftentimes necessary. The second most important lesson learned is that since everyone's experiences and outlooks are unique, there are no right or wrong feelings. Everyone has the sovereign right to feel how they feel, and it is unacceptable to attempt to force anyone to feel differently. By not acknowledging or respecting these two ideals, I made a series of terrible choices that have led me here. What I did was wrong on many levels, not just the physical. One has no right to physically harm another, but just as important, no one has a right to impose their will upon another. I have come to understand this is a fundamental truth of the human experience. Another philosophy that has been instrumental in my rehabilitation is, as long as the man has a reason why, he can deal with any how. Every day of my incarceration has been an exercise in patience, understanding, and acceptance of opinions and attitudes that are often radically different than my own. That is the how. The reason why is my family, more specifically my daughter. Getting back to her, being a positive and daily influence in her life, is the heart of every decision I make. I plan on seeking therapy or counseling once I am released as part of an ongoing self-imposed rehabilitation. My goal is to become a role model worthy of my daughter's respect and admiration. I want her to be able to look at me and say, yes, he made a mistake, but he has admitted to it, paid for it, and put in the work to be a better person. I cannot change what I did. My actions that night are likely to remain with Vicky for the rest of her life. What I can do is express my sincerest regret and apologize for the pain that I caused. I can also assure her and everyone else that there is nothing to fear from me, and nothing like this will ever happen again. I feel I am the very epitome of the type of person the parole system was designed for. I have come to understand not only what I did was wrong, but why it was wrong. And I am deeply sorry to have inflicted that on anyone. I've also worked tirelessly on my rehabilitation classes and my educational classes, completing more in a year than most do their entire incarceration. I have a place to live and a job waiting for me. The keys for success are aligned here and now. Having gone through the probation process recently, I'd like to point out that I completed all the imposed requirements early, as well as paid off all fines and fees. I feel this further indicates that I'm a prime candidate for the successful completion of the parole process. In closing, I'd like to say that I'm not by nature a violent man. I am not a danger to myself, Vicky, or society at large. What I am is a man that has made some really poor choices and put myself into some bad situations. Through my classes and independent studies, I have learned to better evaluate situations to come up with productive solutions. If I am granted parole, I promise to be a shining example of a parolee while I continue to implement these life changes. If I am denied, then the mission remains the same. Get back to my daughter, continue to work as hard as possible, and try to be a better man today than I was yesterday. Thank you for your time, your patience, this opportunity, and your careful consideration.
Thank you, Mr. DeWard. Okay. Mr. DeBorg, I've listened to you talk with us today. And I have to say, I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about your criminal history. You have a history of violence with women. This is your second domestic abuse battery involving strangulation. 2019, when you pled guilty, you were placed on probation. You were arrested shortly thereafter, after your sentencing, for a violation of a protective order. I've got no result as a result of that, but apparently that tells me something was still going on at that particular time. You tell me you took a domestic violence program. Those programs are pretty good. They're supposed to work very well. Apparently it did not work. Perhaps you need a lot more than what you've had so far. It sounds like on paper, and you read a very eloquent statement to us. You're a pretty intelligent man. I've seen in my experience as a prosecutor, a criminal defense lawyer, and a judge that oftentimes people who are violent, especially with women, on more than one occasion, they're very controlling and they're very manipulative. So I think that perhaps in your head, you got the information to be put down on paper and to express it to everyone. I just don't know if it's gotten into you as to what the problems are and how to be able to overcome them. You indicate to me that you've got no drinking problem, no drug problem. You got kicked out of the Navy because of paraphernalia. You got 2 DWIs. You say, oh, that was over 20 years ago. One was maybe 20 years ago. The other one was about 14 years ago. My experience tells me that if a person's been charged with 2 DWIs, they probably were drunk a lot more times and got away with it. Our DOC evaluation shows that you have a substance abuse issue, a high incidence of substance abuse. I believe you need more work. You're doing things, you're doing positive things. I think you're getting there. But in my opinion, and I'm just one vote, you need more work. I think you need more programs. As the warden suggested, thinking for a change, substance abuse. Those substance abuse programs will help you. As you say, well, maybe they think I have a substance abuse issue because of all of these other emotional issues I have. Well, substance abuse treatment will help you with those other addictions in those other treatments. So I'm just not ready to vote to grant the parole at this time. So my vote is to deny. I'm just one vote out of 3. So, Ms. Jackson.
Mr. Gore, I share my colleagues' concerns. I do think you need to move on. Truly do. I think you're making progress. I think you've gained some insight. I think that's important. You've gained some insight into why you respond the way that you do. But I think you need substance abuse treatment. I think you need victim awareness. I think you just need to keep working. And once you get some more programs, reapply when you're eligible.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Ms. Wise.
Young man, first of all, I want to thank Ms. Johnson and your son for the courage you took to show up today. You're doing well, you're doing better than you realize. You are doing well. But young man, I concur with my colleagues, spend some more time reflecting. I hope you listened and you heard what was said today. You even heard what Ms. Johnson said, how she sees you now. And just, just kind of let that kind of impact how you begin to look at yourself to some extent. So my vote is to deny as well for the reasons I already stated on the record.
Thank you, Ms. Wise. Mr. DeBorg, your parole has been denied today, but we encourage you to continue your work and look inwardly. And hopefully, maybe next time you might get a different result, but not today. Good luck to you.